December 1944. Cold that doesn't just sit on you, it climbs into you. The trees are black and bare. The snow is not pretty. It's churned, gray, clumped with mud and oil, and sometimes darker things. You can hear artillery in the distance, but you can't see the flashes through the trees. The sound just rolls in and hangs in the air like weather. Welcome to the Ardennes Forest. The last German offensive on the Western Front has begun. The Allies call it the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler has thrown what's left of his best armor, tanks, mechanized infantry, SS units, paratroopers, into one final swing. One last bet. The goal: split the American and British armies, punch through Belgium, cross the Meuse River, take the port of Antwerp, and force the Allies to the table. If he does that, he doesn't have to win the war. He just has to make the West panic. He just has to buy time. That's the plan. And at first, it works. The weather's on his side. It's snowing. It's low cloud. Allied planes are grounded. The Americans don't have their air support. No fighter bombers. No eyes in the sky. The German armor starts moving through the trees like iron animals waking up. And in front of that, in the path of that, is a thin, spread out, undersupplied line of American units who were supposed to be somewhere quiet, somewhere calm, somewhere resting. This is where our story lives, because what you're about to hear is not a story about winning a glorious attack and planting a flag. It's a story about buying time. This is about a handful of men holding ground they cannot hold for long enough that other men, far away, not even awake yet, will get the warning they need. One of those places, one of those little delays that became a hinge, is a Belgian crossroads called Baraque de Fraiture. But to understand that stand and what it bought, we have to go back 2 days and look at the mess that feeds into it. Here's the situation. In mid-December, American lines in the Ardennes are light. Light on purpose. The Ardennes is supposed to be a quiet sector. It's forest, it's hills, it's back roads. It's not the obvious place for a massive mechanized push, especially in winter. So Eisenhower, the overall Allied commander, puts tired divisions there. Units that have been chewed up in heavy fighting and rotated back to recover. Units missing men and short on gear. Units that need sleep. This is normal. You rest where it's safe, except now it's not safe. On December 16th, 1944, before dawn, German artillery opens up all at once across a huge stretch of front. Thick barrage, shells walking across the snow. Communications lines cut, positions pounded, then the infantry hit, then the tanks. The U.S. front line, in places, just folds. In some places, it doesn't even fight in the traditional sense. It dissolves. It's too thin. It's surprised. It's hit too hard, too fast, with too much. Small outposts are surrounded. Roadblocks get swept aside. Whole companies are just gone in an hour. And inside that shockwave, right there in the chaos, a certain kind of American soldier has to make a choice. Not do we win? That's not on the table. The choice is, do we run and try to save what's left of us? Or do we stand right here, face what's coming, and make them pay for every meter, even if it costs us almost everyone? There's no movie trumpet for that decision, no speech, no flag. You barely have time to think. But that choice, over and over again, made by different men in different places, is why the offensive slowed down instead of punching all the way to the river. Here's the thing about an armored spearhead. It's not just tanks. Tanks look strong. Tanks look unstoppable. But tanks alone don't win. Tanks need fuel. Tanks need ammo. Tanks need clear roads. Tanks need room to maneuver. Tanks need infantry moving with them to protect them from ambush and bazooka teams. So if you can't really stop the tanks, what you can do is delay them. You can make them take a different road. You can force them to deploy early. You can make them turn. You can make them burn fuel by idling instead of driving. You can make them wait for their infantry to catch up. You can make them recalculate. Every little pause, every little detour, every little hold them here for one more hour adds friction. And in an offensive that depends on moving fast, friction is death. So now I want you to see one of those pauses. I want you to see a small group of Americans who were not supposed to be history, who did not have the numbers, did not have the supplies, did not have clear orders at first, and still made one of the most important decisions of the battle. You're on a snowy road junction in Belgium. 3 roads cross here. Nothing special, no monument, just a place where traffic splits. This is near a place that'll later be nicknamed Parker's Crossroads. You'll also hear it called Baraque de Fraiture. You'll hear historians talk about it like it's a footnote. It's not a footnote. It's the difference between the German armor punches clean through and the German armor gets slowed enough for the Allies to dig in. Here's who's here. Remnants, fragments, people who got knocked out of position and fell back, a handful of artillerymen, some anti-aircraft gunners, a recon element, truck drivers, clerks, signals guys. Basically, whoever you could grab on the way out of chaos and point toward a defensible spot. This is not a tidy, intact regiment with full strength and clear doctrine. This is survivors. Many of them are cold to the bone. Some haven't slept. Some are missing gloves. Some are bleeding and don't realize it yet. They pull trucks across the roads to make hasty barricades. They set up a few 105mm howitzers, artillery guns that are supposed to be way behind the lines, not basically up at the front. They swing around some .50 cals, big machine guns, and point them down the approach roads. It looks desperate because it is. You know what else they do? They wait. Waiting might not sound heroic, but waiting is courage when you know what's coming. Because they know what's coming. They know the Germans are pushing hard armor. They've heard the rumors, Tiger tanks, Panthers, SS units who don't play nice with prisoners, and they know they are not enough to win in any conventional sense. But here's the clock. Every hour they hold this junction, every hour they make the Germans stop, deploy, fight, is an hour for American units behind them to set up real defensive lines. And that is the logic of a last stand. It is not, we will defeat the enemy. It is, we will make the enemy burn time. Time is the currency in December 1944. Time is worth blood. That is the arrangement. Now let's talk about their commander. He's young, a captain. His name, Vernon McGarity. Number, Lieutenant Lyle Buck. Number, that's another stand. We'll come to him later. John T. Parker? Close. We're in his neighborhood. The reason I say it like this, and the reason I want you to feel this, is because it's important. Most people don't know the names of the guys who did this. You could walk a crowded street today and ask 100 people, who led the stand at Baraque de Fraiture? You'll get blank looks. But what that officer did was simple. He said, we're holding here. Not we'll fall back when it gets bad. Not we'll see how it looks. We're holding here. And that becomes reality, because sometimes that's how command works under stress. You say the line out loud, and then you're locked in with your men. So let's get close. It's late afternoon, December 1944. Snow in the air. Visibility is awful. You can smell hot metal and frozen oil. The guys at the crossroads start to hear engines. Not truck engines, not jeeps. Big, layered. You feel it in your chest. Tanks, German tanks. Then through the trees, you start seeing shapes. Low, angular, gray guns forward. Here they come. Here's what the Americans have. A few howitzers set up for direct fire, which is not what they were meant for, but you do whatever works. 50 caliber machine guns, bazookas, rifles, not much else. And here's what they don't have. They don't have deep foxholes. The ground is frozen too hard to dig. You try to dig, your shovel bounces. So instead of a trench line, they have shallow scoops in the snow, bits of cover behind knocked out vehicles, and whatever little berms the roadside gives them. That means when the Germans open up, you're not underground. You're on the surface. That's a nightmare. And they still stay. The first thing the Americans do is fire those howitzers almost point blank. That's not an exaggeration. Guns meant to lob shells in a high arc from far back are now being used like giant shotguns in the face of approaching armor. A howitzer blasts. The recoil shoves it backward. The air fills with snow, dirt, bark from shredded trees, and pieces of something that used to be a man. One German half-track, an armored troop carrier, gets hit and rips open. German infantry spill out, hit the ground, start returning fire. The Americans rake them with .50 caliber fire. A .50 caliber machine gun doesn't hit you. It erases whatever part of you it touches. The Germans fall back, regroup. They're cautious now, because that's the other part of this. If you're in a German tank and you don't know exactly what's waiting around that bend, you don't just charge in blind if you can help it. You slow, you reconsolidate, you radio up, you bring up infantry support, you bring up supporting fire. All of that takes time. There it is again, time. The men in this crossroads are bleeding for minutes. That's the trade. Now, what are they thinking while this is happening? It's not complicated. It's not poetic. It's not for liberty and for democracy in some polished speech sense. It's smaller. It's hold. Just hold. Make them take longer. Make them mad. Make them pay. It's the kind of thinking you do when you know you're not walking away from this clean, and maybe not walking away at all. Around this moment, something else is happening elsewhere in the Ardennes. And it's important because it shows you this wasn't one isolated pocket of courage. All across the front that day, there are similar last stands. One of the most famous, a little outfit called the Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon from the 394th Infantry Regiment, 19 men, led by a young lieutenant named Lyle Book. 19. They held off hundreds of German troops for basically an entire day near a place called Lanzerath, slowing an elite German paratrooper unit that needed that road. 19. They were surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned, and they still did their job so effectively that German units behind that point got jammed and delayed. Same logic, same math, time. That's what's happening here at the crossroads too. The American position is taking hits now. Men are going down. Ammo is getting low. The radios are starting to go bad. Some of the guns are too hot to touch with bare hands, but they're still there. At one point, a German force tries to push around and flank the junction, come at it from an angle. The Americans shift. They drag one of the heavy guns, by hand, in the snow, under fire, to face the new direction. That's how badly they need to hold all three roads. Imagine doing that. Imagine being that cold, that exhausted, that scared, and you're still putting your back into a metal carriage under fire just to swing the barrel 15 degrees. You don't do that because you think this is going to look good in a book. You do it because the alternative is they get through us right now. And right now cannot be allowed. Because behind you, miles behind you, are fuel dumps, supply points and crossroads where American reserves are trying to form up. Those guys need a few hours to get their machine moving, to wake commanders, to reroute convoys, to identify where the punch is actually landing, because at first nobody up high knows for sure. Hitler's goal, remember, was to move fast, faster than the Allies could think. Get to the Meuse River before the Americans can even agree on where to block him. He needs speed. So what hurts him most? Friction? Tiny American strongpoints doing something incredibly simple, refusing to die fast. Back at the crossroads, the sun is going. It's getting dark. That awful December half-light where it's not really day, not yet night, just that dim blue where your breath looks like smoke from a wound. The Americans are almost out of artillery shells. They're down to rifles and whatever else is still working. And the Germans are done playing careful. They start to close in. Now here is where you might expect the story to pretend that these men stood to the last bullet, died to the last man, and held the line forever. That's not exactly how it went. Some died in place, some were overrun, some were captured, some in the final crush slipped out in the dark, moving through the trees in twos and threes, trying to fall back to the next defensive line. And you know what? That's not weakness, that's success. Because by the time that Crossroads finally falls, it is not early breakthrough time anymore. It is later, hours and hours and hours later. Those hours we keep talking about, they've been spent, and the Germans have spent them. In those hours, American Higher Command has woken up to what's happening. Reserve units have moved. Roadblocks have gone up. Engineers have blown bridges and choked off key routes. Artillery is being repositioned. Reinforcements are racing in from places that yesterday felt safe. In those hours, Eisenhower and his commanders stop thinking, "Is this a raid?" and start thinking, "This is the main blow." Plug it now in those hours. American armor, real armor, full armor, is on the move to block road networks the Germans absolutely must have to keep their offensive alive. You see it now? That crossroads never had to win, it just had to last, and it did. Now I want you to picture something small. After the fight, after the Germans finally take the junction, they roll through. To them, it's just another point on a map, another bump they flattened on their way west. They see two wrecked American trucks, half buried in snow. They see a howitzer that's been shot through and is still smoking. They see a foxhole that never got deeper than a bathtub. To them, those are just signs of resistance. They don't see what it cost them yet, but miles behind them, the Americans do. Because by the time German armor reaches the spots on the map it needed to reach by noon, it's evening. By the time it reaches the spots it needed by evening, it's the next morning. And in an offensive like this, that delay is lethal. Why? Because fuel. German fuel supplies in December 1944 are a joke. They are tight, they are rationed. Some of the tanks in this offensive literally started with just enough gas to make it to the Meuse River, if everything went perfectly. But now it's not going perfectly. Now they're idling in forests waiting for infantry to catch up. Now they're detouring around blown bridges. Now they're fighting local defenses they didn't expect to even exist. Now they're stalled at choke points where one burning truck, one dead half-track, one knocked-out tank blocks an entire snow-covered road. Every one of those pauses is fuel they'll never get back. And without fuel, all that German armor becomes steel statues. That's what this last stand bought. Not glory, not headlines, not a famous clip for newsreel cameras. It bought empty fuel tanks. It bought frozen German engines. It bought panic in German logistics officers who are already asking, where is that convoy? How far behind are they? How much did we burn today just waiting in the trees? That's the level this matters at. And understand, the German plan needed speed more than anything. If they did not get to the Meuse quickly, if they did not seize the bridges across it fast, intact, dramatic, if they did not show the world in days, look, we've split the Allies, we're threatening Antwerp, then the offensive wasn't just slowed, it was dead. Because the Allies could absorb a punch. They had the manpower, they had the factories, they had the logistics. They could bring in fresh divisions. Germany couldn't absorb time. Germany was bleeding time from the first shot. And who opened that wound? Guys in snow at a nameless crossroads, firing howitzers at tanks like shotguns, dragging guns by hand, bleeding into their gloves, praying their radios would last a little longer, and refusing, flat out refusing, to just step aside. That's the first half of this story. But I told you this wasn't going to be a parade story. This isn't about medals pinned in clean rooms later. This is about a simple, brutal, quiet calculation. If we stay, most of us are not getting out. If we leave, the guys behind us don't have a chance. So we stay, we hold, we buy time. I want you to sit with that, because war movies love charge, they love attack, they love take the hill. They don't love buy 6 hours with your life so somebody you'll never meet can set up a roadblock 10 miles away. But that's how wars are actually turned. And here's where we go next. We are going to follow what those purchased hours did. We're going to see what happens when the German spearhead, which was supposed to be a knife through butter, hits something that looks like stone instead. We're going to watch how one desperate stand becomes a chain of stands. We're going to see why generals in warm headquarters will later say, very calmly, the line held. But holding that line, in real time, looked like freezing, bleeding, hungry Americans, shaking in ditches and firing until their hands didn't work. We're going to watch how buying time at an ugly little crossroads helped save an entire campaign. And we're going to end with this. The last stand that didn't win the battle still won the battle. We're going to stay in December 1944, but now we're moving downstream. We're going to watch what that delay actually did. Because here's the truth nobody says in the official version. That stand at the crossroads, that little cluster of scraped-together Americans who had no business holding off armor? They weren't inspiring, they were structural. They gave the US Army time to wake up, and once the US Army is awake, things change. Let's talk about the fuel problem first. German tanks are powerful, German armor doctrine is aggressive, German commanders know how to exploit panic. But by the winter of 1944, the German army runs on two kinds of fuel. What's in the tank right now and hope. Hope that they'll capture Allied fuel dumps before they run dry. That was part of their plan, by the way. People forget that. They weren't just planning to punch through the lines. They were planning to survive by stealing American gasoline along the way. That's desperation dressed as strategy, which means if those fuel dumps get moved before the Germans get to them, if the Americans have even a few hours to load up drums, burn what they can't take, blow what they can't haul, the Germans don't just slow down. They freeze where they are. So every hour those men in the forest bought, every hour on that snowy junction, every hour that a German column had to stop, deploy, take casualties, sort itself out, call up infantry, reconsolidate, that was an hour that American quartermasters further west said, pack it, torch it, move it. And they did. So let's play this out. Somewhere behind the line, behind that crossroads that just got chewed up, American logistics officers are walking through fuel depots with clipboards yelling, "Load those trucks now. Anything we can't move, burn it." And they do. Drums get rolled into trucks. Other drums get punctured and set on fire. Equipment gets spiked. Bridges get mined. That's the difference between a German spearhead that hits a resupply jackpot and a German spearhead that turns a corner and finds nothing but blackened drums and smoldering puddles of gasoline in the snow. Do you understand how catastrophic that is for the attacker? Imagine you're the German tank commander. You were told, blitz through. You'll grab American fuel, then keep going. But instead, you're burning diesel just to get to the next village. You're stopping every 30 minutes. You're waiting for infantry. You're backing up and trying side roads because Americans blew the bridge you needed. And now you roll into a depot, and the depot is smoking. And your fuel gauge is already below half. That is death. Not in a dramatic, cinematic explosion way. In a slow, sick way. The kind of way where you look at your map and realize, we're not making the river. We're not reaching the Meuse. We're not taking Antwerp. We're not forcing a negotiated peace. We're going to stop in the middle of Belgium with empty tanks and freezing crews, and then we're going to get hit. That is what those hours bought. Now let's talk about the men moving into position in those hours. Patton, you know that name. General George S. Patton Jr. Aggressive, profane, fast. Patton is south of the Bulge when this offensive hits. He doesn't know it's coming. Nobody does. The Germans pulled off real surprise on this one. But as soon as it hits, as soon as that first morning turns from unusual artillery into, they just blew a hole in our line and armor is pouring through, Patton does something that very, very few generals in World War II could have done. He turns an entire army, not a battalion, not a regiment, an army. He pivots huge forces north in winter through awful roads on short notice to slam into the southern flank of the German advance. That does not happen instantly. That doesn't happen in 1 hour. That takes time. And in war, time is a door you either hold open or it slams shut on you. Those roadblocks in the Ardennes, those last stands on snowy crossroads, those 19-man platoons that refuse to move for a full day, they're the hands holding that door open long enough for Patton to kick through it. And let's be very clear, if the German armored spearhead had reached its river crossings before Patton turned, before the Americans could form new solid lines, the story of December 1944 might have sounded very, very different. Not Germany wins the war. By that point, Germany wasn't going to win the war. But a massive political shock in the West, a crisis inside Allied command, sudden panic among British and American leadership, possibly. Imagine the headlines back home. German armor reaches the Meuse. Panzer spearhead drives toward Antwerp. Even if the Allies eventually stopped it, and they would have, the cost could have been so much worse, the war so much longer, that thousands and thousands more people die for the same final outcome. All because things moved too slowly in those first 48 hours. But they didn't move slowly. They were slowed. And they were slowed on purpose by men who knew what it was costing them. Let's zoom back in. I want you to picture something personal. It's late night after the stand at that crossroads. What's left of those American defenders, the ones who weren't killed and weren't captured, are filtering back through the trees in twos and threes. It is dark. It is freezing. They are exhausted beyond description. Some of them are missing helmets, missing weapons. One guy is walking with no rifle at all, just carrying a belt of machine gun ammo over his shoulder because that's the only thing he has left to bring back. They're trying to find friendly lines that might not even be where they were this morning. They don't know factually what they just did. They don't know factually how long they held. They don't know factually how high up the chain that delay just traveled. They just know they're still alive, or they're not. Now jump a few miles behind them. An American colonel is on a field phone in a farmhouse that still smells like boiled cabbage and wood smoke, even though the windows are blown out. He's getting updates in fragments. Road X held until 1700 hours. German armor stalled at Bridge Y, bridge now down. Local American force overrun at Zauer Dash, but enemy delayed approximately 6 hours. 6 hours. Do you hear the way that sounds on a map? That colonel turns to the next officer and says, "Good. That's good. That's enough. Tell division they've got time." That sentence, "they've got time," doesn't sound like a medal, but it is one. Because that sentence is the signal that says, this is not collapsing. We can form lines. We can fight this. And that right there, that moment when chaos hardens into shape, is the beginning of the end of the German offensive. Now let's talk about the German side for a second. Not because we're cheering for them, but because you need to understand what they thought they were doing. Hitler called this operation his last throw of the dice. That's not poetry. That is exactly how he saw it. One last gamble. He believed, or convinced himself, that if he could smash through, split the British and Americans, and take Antwerp, the Allies in the West might fracture, start negotiating, lose the will to keep pushing into Germany, divide the Allies, force a pause, then turn east and deal with the Soviets. That was the fantasy. And here's the ugly truth. It wasn't totally impossible. It was unlikely, but not insane. If, and this is the key, if it moved like lightning. So yeah, he needed tanks. He needed shock. He needed weather to ground Allied planes. But more than any of that, he needed speed. And speed died in the snow at little road junctions defended by guys who should have been resting. Speed died where 19 men in a foxhole said no. Speed died where an artillery crew dragged their own gun into the road and fired it like a rifle. Speed died where an outnumbered platoon covered a retreat they knew they wouldn't join. That's what killed the offensive. Not some grand, cinematic, single showdown. Not one decisive tank battle. Friction, death by friction. Let's move toward the end of this. Within days, the Germans are already behind their own timetable. They were supposed to take key crossings quickly. They haven't. They were supposed to seize fuel. They're burning it instead. They were supposed to keep Allied command in the dark. Instead, Allied command is fully awake, fully engaged, and moving reinforcements. And then the weather breaks. The clouds lift. The snow stops choking the sky. And when that happens, the U.S. Army Air Forces and the Royal Air Force get to work. Fighter bombers, Jabos, P-47 Thunderbolts, Typhoons, P-38 Lightnings, to a German armored column in daylight in open country that is doomed with wings. Now you're not only slow, now you're exposed. Now when you back up to get around a knocked-out truck, some pilot spots you and calls in a strike. Now when you idle at a crossroads while officers argue about maps, you're giving a pilot time to line up a run. Now every delay that cost you hours is about to cost you steel. And this is the pivot. What those men bought at the crossroads wasn't just time. They bought sunrise. They bought the moment when the sky cleared enough for Allied pilots to finally see what was happening and start slashing apart German armor from above. After that, the German offensive stops being an offensive and starts being a meat grinder. The spearhead doesn't spear. The tip shatters. They can still fight. They do still fight. But it's not decisive anymore. Now it's desperate. Now it's, can we escape what we walked into? And from there, the Battle of the Bulge turns. The Germans are pushed back. The bulge in the Allied line shrinks. The Meuse is never crossed. Antwerp never falls. The last gamble fails. In January, the offensive is over. Hitler has spent men and machines he could not replace. It was supposed to buy him time. Instead, it burned it. Now, how is that told later? Later at briefings, you'll hear calm phrases like, the line held. Key positions slowed the enemy advance. Local resistance was stiff. That is how commanders write history for other commanders. Straight face, even tone, no drama. But the real version, the version we've been sitting in, is not calm. The real version is freezing, shaking Americans who hadn't slept in 2 days, firing a howitzer at a tank that was getting closer than it should have been. The real version is a lieutenant in the Ardennes telling 19 men, "We hold here," and those 19 men holding back hundreds for basically a full day. The real version is a captain at a nameless junction saying, "We don't fall back. We are the wall. We're staying right here." The real version is a soldier who started that week as a truck driver, who ends it as last man on a gun crew, who never asked to be the wall and became it anyway. That's not the line held. That's, we bled for 6 hours so strangers could live. I want you to sit with that, because this is what a last stand really is. It's not a dramatic, doomed die on the hill because it's sacred. Sometimes, sure, sometimes it's that. But more often, it's this. You're in the way. You know you're in the way. You stay in the way as long as physically possible. You break the enemy's timing. And then, if you're lucky, you get out. If you're not lucky, you don't. Either way, you already did the job. You already changed the math. In December 1944, in the Ardennes, that math was everything. Because without those hours, without that friction, without those crossroads that refused to open, without those expendable-looking platoons who decided not to be expendable, the German spearheads might have reached their key objectives before the Allies could get organized. And if that had happened, the cost to push them back would not just have been higher. It might have changed the shape of the post-war map. That's how close this came. All because of places nobody had heard of before that week. All because of men nobody taught you about in school. So here's how we're going to end this. Not with a general, not with a headquarters map, not with a medal citation, with one of those guys at that crossroads. It's night. The position has finally broken. He's moving through the trees in the dark with 2 other survivors. His hands hurt from the cold so badly that the pain feels distant. His ears are still ringing from artillery, just a high hum, so he can barely hear the branches snapping under his own boots. He's thinking, "I'm alive. Keep moving." That's it. That's the whole thought. He doesn't know, not yet, that those hours he bought are already being spent by men he'll never see. He doesn't know that Patton is already pivoting an army. He doesn't know that because of him, some German tank commander is right now staring at his fuel gauge in disbelief. He doesn't know that in a few days the weather will clear and Allied pilots will start tearing German armor apart on the roads that lead west. He doesn't know any of that. He just knows he did not run when it first got bad. He just knows he stayed. And here is the part that matters most. That was enough. When people talk about turning points, they love big speeches, big arrows on big maps. But this one, this hinge, it's quiet. It's a crossroads in the snow. It's a gun dragged by hand. It's a lieutenant saying, "Hold." It's a nameless private on a .50 caliber firing until the barrel glowed. It's ordinary people doing mathematically impossible work for just long enough. That is the last stand that bought the Allies time in World War II. Not famous, not pretty, not clean, but final. Because after that, Germany never again had the strength to try something like this in the West. That offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, was the last swing, and it failed. The war would grind on. There would still be blood, and horror, and loss. But strategically, after those days in December, after those crossroads, after those hours bought with frostbitten hands, Hitler's last chance to shock the Western Front was gone. So when you hear "the line held," Remember what that line actually looked like. Remember the wrecked trucks used as barricades. Remember the frozen ground that wouldn't dig. Remember the howitzers firing flat and shaking the trees. Remember 19 men saying, "Not yet." Remember a captain saying, "We stay." Because that's what held the line. That's who held the line. And that's how thousands of men you'll never meet got to live. The last stand didn't win the battle, they'll tell you. But you and I know the truth now. It won the time, and the time won the battle.